I just want to start by, I'm going to talk about the basics today, or the basics of faith, and kind of an ad-lib open. The basics of faith have to do with like the basics of the church. As you know, yesterday we had the service for Jim Phillips. Some of you watched it online. Well, the reason it was online was because in the last few years we've had people, particularly Jerry, and Connie Kylo, and their son Todd, I think is his name. Matt, excuse me. Yeah, Matt, thank you. Put it there, and Julie's been working, and Dee. And Julie, I was getting over the bronchitis. I wasn't working on all cylinders, so to speak. Didn't mention too early, but somewhere in the middle of the week, are you able to help with the service? So we did it with a PowerPoint. It was online. That's what makes the church, is little things like that. And there were these ladies, it was, see if I remember, it was Peggy, and it was Janine, and Peggy, yeah, another Peggy, Peggy's Airing, and Carol Keeney. And they got here probably earlier than they needed to, but they were here for a big block of time just to help serve pie after the service. Jim Phillips, one of the things about his life was he loved apple pie. And he'd go and he'd call somebody and he'd say, how about some pie? So we had apple pies there. But I thought if it weren't for the ladies, if it weren't for Julie did it solo yesterday, that's the stuff that makes the church. And in a sense, that's the stuff that makes our lives. So Jim, by the way, I didn't realize it was quite a traveling man. He said on average he put in 22,000 miles a year. That's a lot of miles, but he'd leave Olympia, come over here for church, and then go back. But he married into this side of the family because he lived his life over in around Olympia, Lacey area. But he married, Linda's going to help me here, Ruth Sather. And her mother was Ida. And how many of you remember Ida Sather up there on the organ in the late 50s, early 60s? It's a few hands. This is the crowd that all of who is over, yeah, over 50, right, Sharon? But she was there for a long time and played probably not as long as Linda did. I think you said you had 30 years in, huh? Oh, my goodness. But anyway, and then I didn't really know Keith Danielson. Do I have it right? But I know that Teresa and Bob went, and they described the service. It was at 11 o'clock. There's no way I could go, but I guess it was, if you're a cowboy, that's the kind of service you want, from what I hear.
For ushering people around.
Yeah. It was out in Hooper, which to me is kind of the ultimate of the cowboy town around here. And, remembering his life, he was a young man. I think, Bob, you said about 62 maybe.
62.
And but that's what belief is. So my sermon today, it's kind of goes back a little bit, touching on the Believe series we went through. But what do we believe? What do we do? What are we becoming? And I had a comment yesterday after the service. I was out here in the parking lot, and somebody, and I don't remember who it was, somebody I didn't really know, kind of pointed at me and said, she said something nice about me, so I'm going to repeat it. She says, I really like you, and I can tell that you really believe in what you say. And I thought, that's pretty basic, but apparently there are some people that do what I do who at least don't come off that way. I'm not judging anybody. But the key is, in terms of growing, is to know that, say, a teacher, preacher, whatever, that they really believe this. They're not just talking, not going through the motion. There's a difference. And I would say that in the course of this sermon, our belief is that way. I think we've all known people that have all the exterior of the best Christians. They look the best, they smile, and everything's great. And we find out later that underneath, there's a whole different life. What we want to be is we want to be authentic people, not perfect. You know me, I'm not perfect. We've all sinned. We've all fallen short. Some of our falling shorts have been great. But if we confess of that and we accept God's forgiveness, we go on. And I really think that that's the core belief. The family, they had 5 kids. It kind of reminded me of my family. My family had 3 boys and 2 girls. My older brother died in his late 60s. He had lifetime diabetes, my older brother. But they had 3 boys and 2 girls. They're all alive, and they were here yesterday. But Janice, who watches this, I know, hello Janice, said, my dad just loved you. And I said, well, I'm going to mention that at the service because, you know, I'm going to take that one because, you know, as a minister, I don't get much negative, honestly, but a lot of ministers do. You know, a lot of ministers, and it could be, to understand being a minister, maybe being a teacher, whatever, you could do something and it's like good, and then somebody comes up and said, you know, I was really disappointed the way you said that, or, you know, you forgot my mother. What do you think that person thinks of when they go home? The 99 things they did well, or that one little thing that somebody mentioned? Well, that's normal, that's life. But what I want to talk about is belief, and the scriptures, as Peggy read so well, and I'm going to go through these quickly here, but when we think about what we believe, from Psalm 139, and I'm thinking of Ann, who couldn't be here today. I know she loves this. But when you think about belief, this goes back to the Old Testament. When you have searched me, Lord, and you know me, you know when I sit, when I rise, you perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, Lord, you know it completely. Isn't that a wonderful sense of belief and understanding? Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to obtain. And where can I go to get away from you, to flee thy presence? If I go to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise up in the wings of the dawn, I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. And I think about how well God knows us. There are people that know us well. I'm going to pick on Pat Bailey here just a little bit, and Judy. I should not have been here 2 weeks ago. I mean, my mind was not clicking, and I kept distance from everybody, but I just chuckle and I see this as true love. After the service, Pat came up here, Judy was kind of behind, and said clearly, you are not going downstairs. You are not going to do it. Get over there and get better. And so I, with my tail between my legs, I went out the back and I went over to the porch of the H. And about a half hour later, I heard a knock, and here was one of the ladies that said, Pastor John, takeout. And they brought me the food. And I thought, there's love. There's love. I mean, a couple of ladies that just knew I wasn't doing well, it kind of knew me well enough to send me over there. And do you think I was offended at that? Zero. It's like, that's the truth in love. That's what you want. That's part of what belief is. It's understanding what we can do. So my bottom line here is belief is like the lady said to me in the parking lot, is you believe this stuff. I mean, it's real to you. I think I've told you that the first big sad disaster of my life was my pastor's wife, who taught Sunday school in high school. We did go to Sunday school in high school. Was in a car accident right before I went to college and died. She was killed, and the pastor was almost killed. He had 2 broken legs and back at a car. They were in a Volkswagen, and a car came, didn't stop in a country road, and it was awful. That one shook me up. And I was already starting to think about being a pastor. But what I remember the most was 3 months later when that pastor finally got up there and preached, and he was able to do that. And instead of losing faith, he proclaimed Jesus Christ as Lord. He said, we live in an imperfect world. He said, the man that did this, he will feel bad the rest of his life, but I believe in Jesus Christ, and I know my wife's with the Lord. And then I thought to myself, I'm like 19, I thought 18 maybe, this is real. I mean, I didn't really want to become a pastor to be a pastor. There's nothing about pastor life that appealed to me, nothing. Zero. Pastors were old and pastors were boring. That's all I knew. And I didn't want to be old and I didn't want to be boring. But then, of course, later I met Pastor Munter, who watches sometime, and he was the one who taught me that pastors can be adventurers. So he was flying in and explored Angel Falls. You ever heard of Angel Falls, the highest waterfall in the world? He parachuted onto there in 1968. And there was a whole story with that I've told before, I'm sure. But he helped me see that you can be a pastor and be real. You can do fun stuff, go on bike trips and things like that, and changed my life. So to conclude this first little part is, I hope that your faith is that real and it's becoming that real. I was listening to one of my favorite broadcasts yesterday, and this guy talked about a family. They were talking about striving to the goal, that life is not necessarily reaching the destination, but life is kind of working your way toward the goal. I think that's why I've enjoyed longer bike trips. It's like, there's no real logical reason to do that. I mean, let me tell you about long distance biking. It's boring. You do the same thing every day. You're pedaling like that. It's dangerous. But there was something that lured me about it because it had to do with going towards the goal, new challenge, and all the people we met. And the thing that I met about the people, and this is on the way to South America and across the country twice when I was 62, people are interested in faith, and they want to laugh, and they want to have hope, and that's what it's all about. So it's just one of those wonderful things when you think about it. And so it became real to me, and I hope that your faith is becoming real. But the rest of the story was they had planned, this family, and he was a busy man, and they had kids, and all this planning. I kind of relate to that. I'm going to miss a Sunday here. And you get ready, and they got to their destination. Let's say it was Virginia Beach. That's where people used to go back my way. He got there, and he went out to the balcony, this guy, and he looked out and says, I want to do this next year. And there's nothing bad about that, but I think what he was saying was it's the journey that's important. It was all that getting ready, you get there, you enjoy your time, but then it goes over again. That's why I think sometimes when we quit work, and if work is our lives and we're 62 or 74, whatever we are, it's like, what's the meaning of this? That's why I always say as Christians we have a bigger goal out there. We have people to share with, we have neighbors to invite, and that's what it's all about. And briefly then, secondly, what should I do? Part of what we should do is kind of, we see our church and reaching out. As Peggy read, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. That's what you should do. That's what I should do. A couple other things. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. Take that seriously. I know a lot of Christians that hang on to hate, and they're not going to forgive or forget ever. Let the peace of Christ rule in your heart, since as members of one body you were called to peace. Easier said than done, right, Steve? I mean, you want to do that. And be thankful. Let the message of Christ dwell among you richly as you teach and admonish one another. And I thought about that many times because as I read about the early church, especially as you go through the book of Acts, I mean, you talk about into it. They were into it. I mean, they met, they prayed, they had their communion, they broke bread, they were just kind of learning about who this Jesus was, coming to faith. It was a journey. And I know it's 2,000 years later. It's not quite the same now, but still, the journey is there, and I don't care how old you are. We have people in the 90s here. I don't know who that might be. 80s, 70s, 60s, 50s, and little kids. But we're all kind of moving ahead. We all have challenges ahead. What should we do? We should live as Peg read there in Corinthians. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 12, now you are the body of Christ, and each one is a part of it. That's why our little church works. Everybody's a part of it. You got a preacher, you got people who do things. My friend Denny Wigman, who's been here a few times, he's the guy with a big smile and plays guitar, kind of gray hair, and he gives me a hard time. Do you know what a pericope is? Any of you know that word, pericope? Good. Pericope is really the assigned lessons of the day. Years ago, a bunch of scholars went together, and over a 3-year period, they gave the assigned, another word is the lectionary. So if you go to a church that follows the lectionary exactly, which I do off and on, the pericope is a lesson for that day. So if you're in that kind of a group, a lot of ministers, they'll go and say, well, we're going to talk about the pericope for this Sunday. And this Sunday, it's going to be John 1 through 10. That's the pericope. Nobody uses that word. My friend Danny was a lifelong high school chemistry teacher. So I didn't get the phone. I was in the middle of the service yesterday, but I listened to it. He said, "Hey, Cross, Wigman." So I'm from the International Pericope Committee, and I'm a little concerned that we've been watching your service, that you're not really doing too well in that pericope, and they may drop you as a member. So call me back. Bye. How many have friends like that? Now you know what pericope is. Yesterday, my other word that a lot of people don't know I used at the service, you know what adiaphora is? I've told you this before. Adiaphora, it's a Latin word. Adiaphora, another word. You like this? It means the things about Christianity that are not central and Christ-focused, like extra things. For example, whether you do the liturgy or not, that's adiaphora. Whether you follow the pericopes or not, that's adiaphora. You don't have to. You see what I mean? Whether like in communion, the Roman Catholics, this is the body and blood of Christ. Lutherans say real presence, we love this, in, with, and under the bread and the wine, the grape juice. That's adiaphora. It's not, you don't have to do it, but it's kind of church tradition. But it's a good word. So here's two words you learn there. Greg, you got that? Adiaphora and pericope. Work that into your next lunch with your friends. But what do? That's what we do. We live, and then finally, who am I becoming? And quickly, I kind of thought about this again as I went through my life, and I thought, I just wrote some words down. Bible camps, 6 years. That impacted on who I became. Horizon of Ventura, that was my 2 years on the beach in California, where I suffered for the Lord, living a half mile from the Pacific Ocean in a free apartment. And I made $4,000 a year, and after 2 years I had saved $1,800, which was enough for the bike trip. Well, that was the next thing, Pedal for People. You've heard too much about that. This October it will have been 50 years since we took off on that crazy ride. That impacted my life. Seminary impacted. My first church in Prescott, Fountain Hills, Portland, Oregon, Sedona. Road bike trip number 2 across the country. And then finally, last on that list, all I wrote down was Mud Flat. Salbu, in interim, 6 month. I didn't want to come. Your friend said, well, you're just there 6 months. How bad could it be? And that's a part of who I am. I never thought that would be me. And I hope, this sounds a little bit egocentric, but you have your own names. You have your own events, people, relationships, things that have happened that have shaped who you are. Some of you have prayed to God, you've had miraculous healing. Some of you had challenges you never expected. That's who you are becoming. So the bottom line is, belief is, this stuff is real. What do I do? As it says there, as Peggy read there, we're, live within the peace of Christ the best we can. And who am I becoming? It's never over. I don't care how old you are. You can become more in Jesus Christ. And that's why I love this church. And finally, just so I don't forget, at the very end, we're going to bless these quilts. And there's 10 or so here. And the reason I'm bringing up the end of this sermon is that's another way that our church reaches out in love. And they're going to go to Nicaragua, Ecuador, we don't know exactly where, but people are going to appreciate having blankets. One more thing of what should I do. So that'll come in a little bit. In Jesus' name, amen.